Welcome back to the Interchange Recharged podcast. We're recording live on the last day of Mackenzie's CCUS conference here in Houston. I'm Sylvia Leyva Martinez, and today we're bringing you conversations from three brilliant voices shaping the future of carbon management. From the state-level regulators paving the way for new projects, to the innovators turning captured CO2 into low-carbon fuels, and finally, to one of Mackenzie's own thought leaders putting it all together into global context. We'll get started with Lily Barkow, Groundwater Section Manager in the Water Quality Division at the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. Lily explains how Wyoming became one of the first states to achieve Class 6 primacy, what that means for project developers, and why having local expertise matters when it comes to permitting and long-term stewardship. Let's dive in. Lily, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So tell me a bit more about your role within the state of Wyoming's Water Quality Division, please.
Yeah, so I'm the Groundwater Section Manager. I've been in this position now for about 9 years.
Okay.
I've been with DEQ coming up on about 20 years. So I worked more in the hazardous waste permitting and corrective action before coming to this role.
Okay.
So over in the groundwater section, I oversee anything groundwater quality related through the state. So I work on cleanup of federal facilities. I do special projects where there's groundwater contamination in a particular area. And then the underground injection control program falls under us for the protection of underground sources of drinking water. So that led to the Class 6 program. I applied for primacy or submitted the paperwork for that primacy application and just helping with the regulations, setting up the program, and just it's full steam ahead for the carbon sequestration program.
Perfect. So can you tell me a bit more about the primacy permitting, like just for our audience to know a bit more about that?
Yeah, so primacy, it's under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And states can apply for primacy, which basically means that they have enforcement authority.
Okay.
So it's within their regulations, either statute or they have rules that shows that they can enforce on Code of Federal Regulations for injection programs. So Wyoming actually got primacy of Class 1 through 5 in 1983. So we're not new to these programs. Our Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, we oversee Class 1, 3, and 5. And then our Oil and Gas Commission, they oversee Class 2 wells, which are the oil and gas disposal wells. And in 2020, we applied, in 2018, we applied for primacy for the Class 6 program and got that in 2020. So we have full enforcement authority to enforce and run these programs as if EPA were running them instead.
Okay.
So operators or applicants, they apply to us, and it's not really any interaction with EPA because we run the program. And so we'll make sure that they're following the rules and protecting those underground sources of drinking water.
Perfect. So effectively, like this is a way to reduce the administrative burden for anyone operating within Wyoming because the jurisdiction falls everything under the state control without going all the way up to the EPA, which we have heard like can be a bit tricky. And it can take time. And for these types of projects, it becomes particularly relevant.
Yeah, and it's really important, for states to have primacy. If you have a particular region at EPA overseeing this program, they're also overseeing 4 or 5 other states.
Yeah.
And with the state getting primacy, we know our states. In Wyoming, Wyoming knows Wyoming.
Yeah.
We know the geology, we know the people, we're part of the communities. It just makes sense for a state to have that primacy, because then we've got a dedicated team. The groundwater section has 14 people altogether.
Yep.
So we're spread between different projects, but our Class 6 program, we have 4 people that are dedicated to just focus on Class 6. And then I help out where needed. But, having that dedication, whereas, the same 3 or 4 people at EPA will have 3 or 4 states
Yes.
to work through.
And also, as you mentioned, the relevance of like Wyoming knowing Wyoming. So you know the geological challenges, you know, like the certain standards of drinking water. Like you have full control under what is built or not or developed or not within the state. So that definitely helps, like knowing the market really well.
Absolutely.
Just to clarify for the audience, what is the intersection there between the water quality division and CCUS projects? Like it would be effectively on the sequestration side and being able to inject CO2 to the ground and the permits related to that?
Yeah. So the CCUS, we're basically the S portion, so
Okay.
the storage. So we'll do the permitting and then the oversight of those injection wells. So we'll start off with the permitting, review all of that application material in regards to site characterization, their monitoring plans, how they're going to construct the well, how they're going to operate that well going forward, establish all those permit conditions as far as, monitoring requirements, pretty much all the way up until site closure. And then in Wyoming, we actually have, after the site is determined closed, the site is transferred over to the state and we conduct the long-term stewardship, which is a really important aspect for industry, to kind of have that stop at the end to show that they've done the work, they've met the regulations, and, the project is just officially ended.
Perfect. So it's like it goes full cycle. It's not only the early part of selecting or giving the permit for accessing these underground assets, but also how, like, what is going to happen to those assets after you're done using them.
Yep.
And I think so far throughout the conversations we've had, that last part has not been mentioned that much about what happens to the asset at the end, because right now everyone is focused on the beginning and getting things started, right?
Yes. I doubt that any of us will be here for that end portion, but because of it being basically that cradle to grave situation, it's always good to start thinking about those things at the end. Having the end in mind, it just helps to develop those objectives for the permit and the project overall.
Yeah, totally. And from your perspective, I've heard it from the other interviews that we had on the show. We've heard about the different challenges related to permitting, but from the person that is applying to get those permits. So how has it been for you and your department to develop those programs, and what is the relevance of them on achieving scale CCUS deployment?
It's really just trying to figure out the best way to convey what information we need.
Yeah.
Because we're also dealing with operators that may be more familiar with a shorter application or definitely a shorter time frame if they're, working in oil and gas or pipelines. These are extremely technical and complex applications, ranging hundreds of pages. Making sure that all of that information is there for us to do our review, but then also in a format that helps, our team to be able to review it in that timely manner.
Yes.
So that they're not digging and trying to find those bits and pieces that helps them. So we've come a long way since, getting primacy. We got primacy. We got our first application just a couple months, after getting primacy, and learning from that application. It was deficient, but did we really have everything, to provide to the operator to really apply?
Yeah.
So it's gone through several iterations to where we are today, just to try to get that transition from getting that application in and getting a permit to construct and then to authorization to inject.
Yeah, perfect. And where did the motivation, to look to obtain primacy come from? Like, was it self-initiated within the department, or potential clients or people looking to develop projects in Wyoming went to ask you if that was an opportunity to develop? How did that work?
Well, as I mentioned, we having primacy of the other classes of wells when the UIC program started in 1983. So it was just an easy addition.
Yeah.
But Wyoming has really been, it's just a very energy savvy state. the citizens, they know energy, they know the questions to ask, and our legislature is just so on top of it. They started thinking about carbon sequestration in 2007, and they evaluated what are the potential risks, what are financial risks, what kind of financial instruments do we take for these projects, how do we set up permitting, how do we develop pore space and unitization agreements. So we had a lot of that in place even before the federal government came out with their rules. So their rules weren't enacted until 2010. So even when we went to get primacy, and we had to then redo our rules, to come up to the stringency requirements of, the federal regulations. We're already doing sequestration as part of enhanced oil recovery. So this is another item for our toolbox for, such an energy savvy state.
Awesome. So it seems like it's possible for other states to replicate those same efforts. It definitely helps that you already had class 1, class 3 permits, but I think it's important to note that it's something that can be replicated, although other states can face different challenges depending on the experience that they already have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And earlier today, you were in a panel, like the keynote panel, and you discussed precisely permitting, primacy as well. So could you tell me a bit of the key takeaways of that discussion you participated in?
Yeah, I hope some of the key takeaways is collaboration, working with your regulators, as you're applying for the process. We have several steps through our process that begins even before an application is submitted. Meeting with them through an informational meeting, just introducing all the key players, getting them in to start to interact with others, within the state, for the unitization, or, if they're going to need to collect additional data, seismic data, working with our Oil and Gas Commission before submitting that application, and then having a pre-application meeting with us so that they can ask those questions of, well, we weren't quite sure about this. So what exactly are you thinking of for the application for us to submit? That collaboration is just so important. We're a different type of regulator these days. We want to work together. And education, the amount of misinformation that's out there, it can hurt, the process. So getting the right people involved, working with your local university, that our School of Energy Resources at University of Wyoming has a phenomenal team that has been studying sequestration for a long time. And so we're so fortunate to be able to just reach out to them for questions, but they come along to either our public meetings or town halls. They go along with the operators to just answer those questions that, are unbiased, and really helps the community to, some of the fears, that they could find off of the internet.
I find it fascinating that two of the points that you mentioned. The first is this willingness from the regulator side to cooperate, because I have the impression that in most states, or in the US in general, the regulator is there to find what is wrong in the application. So it's just refreshing to hear that we're here to help you. Like, you genuinely want to have more projects on the ground, because that's going to bring more investment to the state. Like, it's an interest of everyone to continue developing more large infrastructure projects. So just knowing that you have the regulator on your side, and that you're cooperating with other entities, like third parties that are unbiased, as you mentioned, like the University of Wyoming, I think it's a great way to continue that cooperation and partnerships going. So ultimately, the goal will be to develop more projects and bring in more investment, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. Do you think that permitting reform has the potential to accelerate CCUS projects, or are there other risks that we need to take into consideration?
That is a really good question, and I'm so glad you asked that, because I've been to these different workshops, and people are so eager to help the regulators on permitting reform, and we really appreciate it, but
I love it, but
it's a big but. The problem is, what does that permitting reform look like? Is it going to be a rule change? Because if there's anything that has to go through to change regulations, changes at the EPA level, which then changes it at the state level.
Okay.
And if we have to now enter into rulemaking, that takes us away from actually reviewing permits and working on them.
Yeah.
So getting back to that collaboration, if there's ways that we can address this, through working together, through policies, there's ways to probably streamline it. I'm not saying that there isn't a need for rulemaking. There are parts of the CFR for Class 6 that I think need to be revisited, but just to go in and change some things that we probably can address outside, just by working together. Let's do it that way.
Lily, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was very pleasant.
Lily's story really shows how strong collaboration between regulators and developers can accelerate CCUS development. Wyoming's early move to gain Class 6 primacy proves that when the people who know the land best take ownership, projects can move faster, safer, and with more community trust. That sets the stage perfectly for Catherine Huff from GEVO, who's showing what happens when those regulatory foundations meet real-world innovation. Her team is connecting biogenic CO2 sequestration and sustainable aviation fuel, proof that carbon management isn't just about storage, but about building smarter, circular economies around carbon. Let's listen to our conversation. Catherine, welcome to the Interchange Recharged podcast.
Thank you. It's my first podcast, so I'm so excited to be here.
I'm honored. So perfect. So for our audience, can you tell us a bit more about GEVO and about what you do there?
So my role at GEVO is the Director of CCS Sustainability and Climate Solutions. And my role is to really look at new and emerging carbon markets and ensure that we are looking at them from the technical side and the policy side to ensure the best outcomes for GEVO.
So you do everything, strategy, policy, technical stuff. It seems that you're pretty busy, particularly in the current environment.
Oh, yes. I have a lot of numbers to look at these days.
Yeah, I can imagine. So GEVO right now is scaling its alcohol to jet pathway to make renewable aviation fuel. So could you explain what is the role of CO2 utilization in this entire story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the project that we just acquired.
Okay.
GEVO just acquired Red Trail Energy's ethanol plant, and they had an on-site Class 6 CO2 sequestration well.
Okay.
And that is an incredible combination to have a Class 6 well on site. And so that is now dubbed GEVO North Dakota.
Okay.
And GEVO North Dakota, we're looking to now turn that ethanol facility, add on the proper equipment, and we call it, like an add-on facility to create alcohol to jet.
Okay.
And what that means for sustainable aviation fuel or renewable aviation fuel is that we're going to have that same stream off of fermentation of that biogenic CO2. And today we are sequestering that in that Class 6 well, and we're going to continue to do that when it's the alcohol to jet facility. That will still exist. And so that's how sequestration plays a role into GEVO today.
Yep.
But also we're looking at, now that there's parity in the tax incentives for Section 45, 45Q and 45Z, 45Q being carbon removals, 45Z being transportation fuels, especially with lower CIs or lower carbon intensity. We're really looking at what are our other opportunities. So we know that enhanced oil recovery and CC utilization and sequestration is an opportunity with EOR, and that could be a means to lower our carbon intensity for our fuel as well. So that's how it really pairs into alcohol to jet.
I love that. So it seems that it's like a holistic solution, right? Because it's not only capturing the carbon on site, but also you're finding a use for that, which in some of the previous conversations in these last episodes have been around, okay, it seems that there's a lot of focus on the sequestration part right now because of how the tax incentives are structured. But on the utilization side, there's still this gap on how are you making the CO2 reach the final off-taker or the final person that is going to be using it. So this is a clear example on how it's possible and how it's already happening in the market.
Yeah. And we don't want to deny that it makes sense to use our Class 6 well that's on site.
Yeah.
But we also don't want to deny that there's opportunities in the future for other mechanisms. We want to support our product where we can lower the carbon intensity. And so that could include CCUS, that could include CCU someday.
Yeah.
The opportunities are there. The other thing that I did want to add and clarify is that a lot of people get the misconception that GEVO is only looking at CCS or only looking at CCUS to lower our carbon intensity score. And that's simply not true. The thing about GEVO is that even without CCS, we have a low carbon fuel.
Yep.
We are looking at renewable energy to power our plant. We are looking at biogas. GEVO has a renewable natural gas facility where we take the manure from 3 dairy farms.
Yes.
We upgrade it to pipeline quality methane so that methane is in the manure, and we upgrade it to pipeline quality. That could be a product that we bring to our facility to decarbonize. We can have process improvements. So despite or in the absence of CCS and CCUS, we already have a low carbon fuel that is incredibly necessary to decarbonize the aviation industry because they need that drop in fuel because they're a long ways out from turning into a different, using different technologies.
Your own career spans very different areas. Like you've been in oil and gas, you've been in the energy space. Right now you are in carbon management and climate policy. So what drew you to this field and just staying in all the energy landscape that can be quite challenging, but also very interesting?
Yeah, it's been a very rewarding career, and that is correct. I've been 18 plus years in the energy industry, and really what keeps me here is innovation. The thing is that when I started my career, I immediately got thrown into a team that was trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the thing I loved about that team is that they were seeking to get away from the old. They were saying, we can't do things the way we used to do. We need to look at the future. We need to look at reducing greenhouse gas emissions in order to continue producing energy. And that drew me to GEVO, of course, because that's exactly what GEVO is doing.
Yeah.
GEVO is saying, hey, we have this low carbon fuel additive, which is ethanol. It has a lower carbon intensity than the products that it's compared to, which are diesel and gasoline. Those are fossil-based products.
Yeah.
And we're going to do things differently. We know that the aviation industry needs a lower carbon intensity fuel. And we can do that not only cost effectively, but we can do it at scale, and we can bring in now CCS, CCUS to continue to decarbonize.
Yep.
And of course, we're looking at everything. So innovation really is the theme of my career, and that's what keeps me here.
I love that. And I think there's also this passion on trying to make things more sustainable. Like we are going to need fuels, right? And that there's no escaping that. What is the most sustainable, ecological way to achieve that? And that's part of the work that you're currently doing at GEVO.
Yeah, and it's not just about sustainability. For me, I'm still an engineer, and I look at, okay, well, what is going to decrease greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow from today? And I think people get so stuck on, and they lose sight of that you need to have that decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. And as long as you're doing that, you're winning.
So in the project that you mentioned earlier, the GEVO North Dakota one, you have been exposed to sequestration part, but also the utilization part. So is there a clear pathway on one versus the other? And how can that change between now and, I don't know, the next 2-3 years?
Yeah, I brought this up in the panel that I was on for CO2 utilization. When we're looking at sequestration versus utilization, they're both cash positive. They're both great for the environment in sense of that it'll lower the carbon intensity of your fuel.
Yeah.
Right now, sequestration is having a space where it is more competitive.
Yep.
And the reason for that is because we can bring it to the voluntary market.
Okay.
We know the voluntary methodologies really aren't looking at CCUS, especially around EOR.
Yep.
Even though EOR has gained parity in the U.S. Section 45 tax credits, and we've seen parity in the regulatory markets so that we can apply CCS and CCUS to those fuels and receive a lower carbon intensity for that. In the voluntary market, you just have that added revenue that you can't gain from participating in CCUS. So if I have to pick one today, it's going to be sequestration,
Yep.
just because there's kind of that trifecta: tax credits, regulatory market, voluntary market.
Yes.
And, we'll hope for more opportunity in the future because at the end of the day, we need those opportunities.
Yes. So on the utilization side, what are the strongest demand signals, or where are the strongest demand signals coming from? Like, is it a clear industry, a certain type of fuel or chemical? What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, so of course I'm going to be biased on this one. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at demand signals, I really look at it personally from two perspectives. I look at it from what are the hard to decarbonize industries? Well,
Yeah.
we know that's aviation. We know we can't switch to hydrogen overnight.
Yeah.
We know we can't switch to electrification overnight. So we need that drop-in fuel that has the lower carbon intensity, lower greenhouse gases than the incumbent or fossil fuels that are available today.
Okay.
The other thing I look at is where are the customers actually getting educated? And I know that sounds weird, but have you bought a plane ticket recently?
Yeah.
Have you seen how it's like, here's an opportunity to lower your greenhouse gas footprint or your carbon footprint? That education is there. And that's a really challenging message to
Yes.
portray to a huge audience. And a ton of people, of course, travel and buy plane tickets.
Yeah.
So I think the demand is there for those two reasons. One, it's a hard to abate sector. And then, of course, you have that customer education that's already happening. So I really see that being a really positive place for CO2 utilization to go towards those fuels, especially for GEVO, because that's going to reduce our CI score. And that's a winning situation where you're reducing those greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, you already touched a bit on this, but how does CCS or CCUS compare to other technologies like hydrogen or biogas? Because you're working on those different projects at GEVO.
Yeah, so GEVO has a facility called GEVO Northwest Iowa RNG, and that is the facility that's a renewable natural gas facility. It has those 3 dairies that we bring to one upgrading facility, and we take that manure, we put it in an anaerobic digester, goes to upgrading facility, we clean it up, and it becomes pipeline quality methane. Well, the part of that is it's about 60% methane and about 40% CO2.
Okay.
So there's a lot of synergy between biogas and sequestration because there's that CO2. Now you'd have to ask our engineering team if it's financially feasible or viable, but honestly, we're not doing it today. We're not capturing that CO2. I really think it comes from the facts that we talked about in the panel. There's challenges with pipelines and permitting. The infrastructure isn't there. But I do think that there will be more of that cohesion when we have that infrastructure in place to have those types of projects. Now, hydrogen is also important. One thing that we need for GEVO North Dakota in order to do that conversion between ethanol and convert it to jet fuel is you need some hydrogen.
Okay.
So we've looked at it where one scenario is competitive because it's going to be probably green hydrogen, which doesn't take into account CCS, CCUS at all. But then there's the one that does have synergy, and that's going to be blue hydrogen. So that's going to be a cheaper option, of course, and it'll be from fossil natural gas or maybe even, who knows, renewable natural gas. But then you can collect the CO2 off of that and have a lower carbon hydrogen. Yep. So biogas, just to summarize, I see a lot of synergy there as long as the infrastructure comes into place. In terms of hydrogen, it can be competitive if we go with green hydrogen, but a lot of synergy if we go with blue hydrogen.
Perfect. So it seems it's not picking one technology over the other, is the ability to create those synergies to achieve the ultimate goal of decarbonizing fuels, right?
Yeah, and doing what makes the most sense and what's most cost effective as well.
Totally. So there are a lot of options to consider.
Yes.
So I know that's going to change depending on the client, the project and such. So there's a lot to do there.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is the biggest opportunity that you see in the CO2 space over the next 5 years?
So I'm going to stick with sustainable aviation fuel as being the biggest opportunity for CO2 because there is that synergy between lowering the carbon intensity further from what we already do today at GEVO. But of course, we want to see everything be successful. So you'll see, we've talked about cements here today and lowering the carbon intensity of those. And at the end of the day, though, the biggest opportunity, I think, is those hard-to-abate sectors, and aviation's at the top of my list.
Yeah. So there's still a lot of work to do, but I'm happy to see all the different solutions that have been discussed throughout the conference. So I don't know about you, but I feel that there's a lot of optimism around. Obviously, there are challenges, but there's also confidence that together as an industry, we can overcome it. So GEVO is going to be part of those solutions as well.
Yes, I agree with that.
Perfect. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, it was a pleasure joining you, and thank you for getting me through my first podcast.
Catherine really brought home how smart business models and the right policy mix are what make carbon solutions scale, not just the tech. And now we got a real treat. It's not often you hear two Wood Mackenzie podcast hosts on the same show, but today you do. Ed Crooks, Vice Chair of the Americas and host of the Energy Gang, joins me on the Interchange Recharged podcast, this time on the guest seat. Usually, I'm tuning into the Energy Gang to hear Ed ask the questions, but today, he's the guest. We dive into what's shaping the CCUS conversation globally, from Climate Week in New York to policy shifts, AI-driven demand, and how the market is balancing climate ambition with energy security. Here's my final interview. Enjoy. Ed, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So great to be on your show. Always really enjoy podcasting with you. It's been, when did we last do it?
We did at SES.
Yeah, exactly. Earlier this year at the other Wood Mackenzie event, Solar and Energy Storage Summit. That was great fun. Very glad to be doing it again.
So I'm so happy that you're here in my hometown. We're recording live from the CCUS conference. And as part of your work, you're also a host. For the audience who doesn't know, Ed hosts the Energy Gang.
Yeah.
So tell me more about it.
Well, exactly. So the Energy Gang is the other podcast from Wood Mackenzie where we talk about energy. It's me and a group of regulars who we have on all the time. In particular, Amy Myers-Jaffe from New York University, who's just a fantastic person, brilliant kind of expert in the world of energy, knows everything and everybody in this world. And we talk about things somewhat the way you do, but we talk about, in particular, sort of topical things as they're coming up, sort of breaking news. What is the latest hot topic in the world of energy? And we do that typically every other week, but we also publish podcasts a lot more frequently when there are big events on. Mm-hmm. So, like I was just at Climate Week.
I was going to ask about that because I know you were there.
So we did a series, we did 3 or 4 episodes out of Climate Week.
Tell me more about it. Like, what were the key takeaways? What was the mood overall in Climate Week?
Well, it's funny in that you might have thought, given everything that's gone on in the world in terms of, I guess, in particular, change in the US, change of administration, change of administration to one that's very definitely not focused on climate change as a priority, is very much opposed to moving towards net zero and so on. And more broadly in the world, I guess you would say a shift in the focus of many people that are thinking about energy away from decarbonization and towards thinking about energy affordability and security. Despite all of that, Climate Week was very busy, very active. I think it was the busiest one ever in terms of the number of people who went, the number of events.
That's surprising. I was not expecting that.
And I mean, one of the things possibly that's going on there is, certainly a few people said this to me, was that people went to Climate Week in New York because they're not going to go to COP30 in Belém, Brazil in November for a couple of reasons. Partly because it's just logistically very difficult. Yeah. And if you've heard all the stories, I mean, so we as the Energy Gang, we have been typically going to COP. Exactly. We usually go to COPs. This year we're not going, partly because it's so expensive. I don't know. I mean, the prices for accommodation there, absolutely hair-raising. And also because I think there is a sense that it's not going to be particularly a significant COP in terms of really kind of driving change in the global energy system. It's
interesting.
It's meant to be a very important one, right? This was meant to be the COP where countries deliver their new round of NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and everyone is meant to be stepping up in terms of increased ambition. And some countries have been doing that, and we talked about China's NDC on the show a couple of weeks ago. That's a great one. I would recommend everyone go and check that out. We had a really interesting discussion about China's NDC and the question of whether it's kind of under ambitious, which some people were saying, or whether it does actually still point to a very significant change in China's energy industry in terms of development of low carbon technologies. So, things are happening, but in terms of what people thought COP30 might be when they thought about it a few years ago, and people thought this is going to be the big event that really kind of decisively puts the world on a pathway to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, it's not going to be
It's not happening this time around.
So as I say, people went to Climate Week instead, and I have to say, quite a lot of the time they didn't talk about climate. So it was very busy, very active. A lot of people there.
You're going to Climate Week and not talk about climate.
Well, my joke was it should have been called AI Week instead. So
I'm not surprised at all, honestly.
So all those other things that people are really interested in terms of energy right now, things that seem urgent priorities, meeting the growing demand for energy from AI, questions of affordability, questions of reliability, resilience, energy security, all that stuff was discussed a lot.
I was going to ask, do you feel that is a global sentiment? Because it's very clear in the US, right? This transition, and it's something that we mentioned in yesterday's episode, we're moving away from decarbonization at zero all the way to energy dominance and energy independence. And again, this is very clear in the US. Do you perceive that that's something similar all across the globe, or the mindset is changing regionally?
It's a great question to ask, because I think there's a real danger that you can get blinkered in terms of your own perspective.
Yeah.
You and I both live in the United States, so we both see the American perspective more strongly.
That's
than
how the
other.
market is reacting right now here.
And as I always say about all of these things, everywhere is a village. New York is a village where I live. Houston is a village where you live. London's a village. Paris is a village, Beijing's a village. All of these places, people have their own set of perspectives. They talk to the people they know. And it's really important to try and break out of that perspective and to see things more broadly on a global scale, and to not be kind of just blinkered by what is local to you and what seem like the important priorities in your little local village. All of that said, my sense of it is, even when I talk to people around the world, that essentially shift away from decarbonization, that slowdown in the pace of the transition is a global phenomenon. I think it is something that is certainly most apparent in the United States. But if you talk to people from Asia, if you talk to people from Europe, they definitely feel some of those same pressures in terms of slowing decarbonization. Absolutely not always and everywhere. And I certainly think the global transition that is being driven by China is super important, and cheap Chinese exports of low carbon technologies, solar panels, battery storage, EVs, all of that is having a huge and growing global impact.
Totally.
But the kind of the policy support feels like it is weakening in a lot of places, and the places where the policy support has not actually weakened yet, it's under quite a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Talking about policy, actually, and tying it back to the event we're currently at, the CCUS conference, you moderated a panel yesterday on policy and regulation. And it was also this US versus a regional view. So could you tell me a bit more about the key takeaways of that session?
So one of the things I thought was really interesting about that session was, again, to this point about the contrast between views in the US and views in the rest of the world, that the administration here, broadly speaking, doesn't think addressing climate change is the top priority.
It's a priority, not anymore.
Exactly, not the priority of energy policy. They don't believe that moving towards net zero should be a priority. They actually think that would do more harm than good. And you're seeing that in all kinds of policy moves from this administration. What they do believe in is trying to maximize investment and job creation and exports out of the US. And to the extent that there are markets internationally for low carbon products, the US can potentially benefit from being able to produce low carbon products that they can sell to the world.
Yeah.
And that has very important implications then for CCUS. And that was something, as I say, we talked about quite a bit on my panel, was to the extent that you can decarbonize the value chain using carbon capture, and things like you can produce low carbon hydrogen, which could be used for blue ammonia possibly, and then exported to the world. Other kinds of chemicals, you can use low carbon hydrogen for petrochemicals, you can use it for fuels, all those kind of lower carbon intensity products that could be produced, as long as there are markets around the world, whether driven by regulation or by customers' desire to have reduced emissions in their value chain, then that means there is a reason why you could still pursue decarbonization of various kinds, including CCUS, in the US.
Yes.
So that's a big theme. There's definitely some potential there. I mean, I think there are issues with that whole thesis, not least because, as we've just been saying, that some of the policies that support demand for low carbon products in Asia and in Europe may be under pressure. I mean, what did you think about that? Is there something you've talked to people about here?
Actually, I was thinking about the opening remarks by Valerie Evans, the head of CCUS.
Yeah.
And I found it fascinating. She showed a graph where it has like all the announcements and targets by different countries and the announced projects. And something that she mentioned was very interesting was that last year you would see the top 2 countries were the US and Canada. Now, the top, I think it was 3 or 4 countries are actually from Europe. So it seems that these changes in policy, the uncertainty overall in the market is shifting away or is moving investment away from one region to the other. And it's a part of the discussion that we've been having in the podcast that, well, uncertainty is driving away investment. And just that graph would show exactly that. We know that policy has a direct impact in the energy landscape, but such a clear way to see it is just interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a very clear theme that I've had. Actually, it was true on my panel and in other conversations I've been having here. Everyone's been really strongly emphasizing the importance of policy stability, as you say. And, these are multi-year, multi-decade investments in terms of...
And very expensive investments.
Exactly. If you can't rely on policy not to change in 3 or 4 years' time, that's no basis on which to plan and make these very large investments, as you say.
Yes.
And that is clearly a real problem for the industry. And I do wonder this, as you say, that slide that Vori showed was really interesting, but these European policies that are now strongly supportive of CCUS, are they going to continue to be that, given all the economic strains, the other issues that we're seeing around the world? Is it possible that 3 years from now, we're going to be saying, oh, well, now the policy support in Europe's kind of faded away as well, and European projects are stalling, new projects are not being announced.
Yes.
And that's clearly a very real risk.
And this is a story that already happened in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act. People were relying on those incentives, and for solar and wind, it's like suddenly they're going away. Yeah. So what's happening with all the projects that are already ongoing? We're already seeing project cancellations. Like in addition to the OB3, we also have all the changes that are happening within the administration. One of the elements that we have been discussing in the podcast as well is changes within the EPA that are affecting not only renewables, but also CCUS. Everything is intertwined. So
no, exactly. That's huge. And the thing that I've been really struck by, which I have to admit I hadn't kind of appreciated as an issue previously, but has come up a lot in conversations, is this question of the greenhouse gas reporting program, which of course is actually something which is also being driven by OB3. Are we settling on OB3 as what we're going to call it for short? I
heard OBA.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's just shorter than one.
Anyway, that one, OB3. So the thing that, of course, seemed to be the case when the bill was finally signed into law was that CCUS has done okay, right?
Yeah, 45Q, safe.
Exactly. It's been saved, as you say, whereas a lot of these tax credits for wind and solar and so on being cut very significantly. For some other technologies, these new FIOC rules on foreign entities of concern, they're going to have a big impact. All of that. Mostly the CCUS industry seemed to be spared the impacts from that. But there was this other change in OB3, which was this lifting of greenhouse gas reporting requirements, where you don't have to start reporting now until 2034. The idea was that by law, all that reporting, which has been the case since 2008, 2009, companies in the US have been compelled to report their emissions if their emissions were higher than 25,000 tons a year, broadly speaking. There's a few other kind of nuances to that, but basically, if you're an emitter of 25,000 tons a year or more, you have to report those to the EPA. That requirement was suspended in OB3. And so now the EPA, as you say, has been coming out and saying, well, it's no longer legally required for us to compel companies to report this stuff. So we're going to stop collecting this information and we're not going to make people report this data to us. And this is only a proposed regulation at the moment, and people are commenting on it. But it's clear that if it did become adopted as a final rule, that has huge implications.
Yes,
And
like
actually,
you change the definition of RECs, what's going to happen with carbon markets. So
yeah, exactly. As you say, all those things change. And it seems actually like that could very fundamentally undermine the CCUS industry as well, because if you are not requiring everyone to report their emissions, then how can they demonstrate emissions reduction, that the carbon is being captured and sequestered or used? And so that means you can't get the 45Q tax credit. Eligibility for the tax credit is based on reporting under that program.
Yep.
So without the program, what happens to the tax credit? I think it's so, as I say, none of this is final yet. It's all being kind of debated.
So effectively, like this adds to the uncertainty in the market. So people that are in this conference right now, they're making investment decisions now. And if they're following the current rules, then that changes completely how they are approaching that investment. So how do you model, how do you protect yourself against that risk of the policy potentially changing over the next few months?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think the message from some of the people I've been talking to is that clearly there's a desire to deregulate, reduce the regulatory burden on businesses by not forcing them to report their greenhouse gas emissions. And people would say, yeah, that totally makes sense. And we're definitely in favor of deregulation, not imposing unnecessary burdens on business.
Yeah.
But there is actually a genuine use for this greenhouse gas reporting program. Yeah. It's important for CCUS. It'll be important also for selling these low carbon products in world markets. As I
yes,
do you think,
exactly.
Do you think that's a priority? And in particularly with Europe's carbon border adjustment mechanism coming in and all the rules that that's going to create and all the necessity for reporting that's going to mean in terms of US exporters into Europe.
So effectively like US definitions versus the rest of the world. So you were mentioning earlier, like we have all these different villages, but they're talking to each other.
Exactly.
So they're not speaking the same language.
As you say, we have there are villages all over the world, but it's a global economy.
Yeah.
And goods and capital flow all around this global economy.
Yep.
And as you say, you need some kind of common standards, at least kind of ways of understanding each other that can make that trade possible. And if you don't have that, it causes problems. And so that, I think, is the risk a lot of people are flagging up. And as I say, this is not yet final. We're going to see how this evolves, but this is something that clearly everyone in the industry is going to be watching very closely to see how that plays out.
Something that I'm looking forward throughout the rest of the conference is seeing how are people thinking about risk management for this particular aspect. There are obviously other elements of risk within CCUS project development. We've been talking about permitting issues, changing regulation, overall uncertainty in the market. So I guess I'm looking forward just to seeing how these conversations unravel in the event to see what are people doing about it. And what is the best way right now to approach that uncertainty and continue project development flawlessly?
Yes, absolutely. So what was your overall takeaway then? So here we are, day 2 of the conference. It's kind of coming to an end. What did you think in terms of the mood of the industry and how people are managing that uncertainty?
So it seems like people are very confident about it. So they are aware.
So people are very confident.
Are confident, on their ability to meet those challenges. Because on one end, there were a lot of comparisons with the solar industry back when it first started. it seems that everyone is aware that CCUS is facing the first of a kind challenge. Everyone knows about it. The financiers know about it. The people developing the technology know about it. One element is that the technology itself is not new. The business model itself is the one that is new. So it's a matter of educating the customers, educating the financiers, educating all stakeholders in general, and being able to show like, look, these are all the challenges that the industry is facing right now, but these are the potential ways that we can tackle them. One of the main ones that was mentioned in previous interviews was about permitting. Like you need a lot of permitting for pipelines to transport the CO2 from generation to where it's going to be stored or used. And that's a challenge that we know that is not going to change overnight because you rely on how regulation is going to adapt to all these new infrastructure. But still, like there are different ways that people are thinking about, well, I'm going to make the sequestration site closer to generation whenever it's possible. You can find different ways of other transportation mechanisms that are less subject to permitting issues. I don't know. There seems to be a lot of innovation and creativity that is leading to that overall confidence that I'm perceiving. Is that something that you're seeing too?
Yeah, that's interesting. So before I answer that question, just on the permitting point, I do think that's one area where I am cautiously optimistic there will be some progress in terms of legislation getting passed in Congress. It does seem like when you talk to people, there is genuine bipartisan interest in permitting reform that would make it easier to build infrastructure of all kinds, including low carbon infrastructure.
And the administration has been vocal about it. So
Exactly. So I do think that's something where you could build a consensus, and where as agreement, basically it's become too hard to build anything in the United States. And so tackling some of those issues is in everybody's interest. And if you got legislation passed, then again, hopefully, fingers crossed, that could be something that would be sort of resilient to future changes in administration. It would make it easier to build pipelines and make it easier to build wind farms as well, right? And so
wind, not necessarily, but
but that's exactly the point. But you right, that you exactly, I think, put your finger on one of the issues, which is if you pass legislation, then it helps protect all industries that are trying to invest.
Yeah, all infrastructure
depending
projects.
on what the particular kind of angle and opinion of the administration happens to be at any particular time. To answer your question then on the mood of the industry in general, the CCUS industry, I'm probably a bit less upbeat than you are, I think. To me,
why?
When I have been talking to people, I do think people on the whole are realistic about the challenges, realistic about the way the global mood has shifted.
Yes.
Realistic that for a few years now, it will be pretty tough going in CCUS globally. What I strongly believe, though, is that the pendulum of global policy and global focus on what are the most important issues will swing again at some point in the future.
Yeah.
It always has swung, right, going back to the 80s, however far you want to go back. We've had a kind of a backwards and forwards in terms of global focus on climate as an issue. If we swung away from worrying about climate at the moment, I am certain we're going to swing back towards focusing on it. Couldn't tell you when that's going to happen, but I do believe it's going to happen. And when it does, it seems absolutely clear that CCUS will have to be a vital part of the toolkit then. It is something we are definitely going to need.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, how do you kind of keep the industry alive, and how do you keep, as you say, innovating in terms of business models, in terms of structures, in terms of financing, to make sure that when we are in the position again where people are really saying, okay, now we need to actually kind of step on the gas and build this industry out at scale, we're ready to do that.
You know what, like probably the only challenge I have there compared to what has happened in previous years, load growth. You mentioned at the very beginning of this discussion that Climate Week was more of AI Week, Data Center Week. And I think that's like a fundamental change that is happening in the market now. The load is growing and we're reaching this point where we need all energy sources. But I think it's embedded in many off-takers, the mindset of, okay, I need to meet the load, but I also want to maintain, like, I want to still reach net zero, even if it's not within the policy, it's in their own interest. So that's how technologies like CCUS are going to continue growing, because there is this match between the need for more electricity, but also to clean that up.
100%. No, I think that's absolutely right. That's a really important point that, again, one of the features of the industry right now that makes me more optimistic about the outlook for innovation and investment in decarbonization is exactly that, as you say, load growth, and in particular load growth driven by big tech companies that have emissions commitments, that do care about climate as an issue, and they're looking for power wherever they can get it, and they're looking at innovation. And so they're looking at small modular nuclear reactors, possibly large scale, big, pressurized water reactors. They are looking at enhanced geothermal. And when I say looking at, not just kind of thinking about it in theoretical terms, actually putting real money down to support the development of these technologies. And they are starting to support CCUS as well. And that is something which has already got some support. Seems very likely to get more support. Very interesting conversations I've been having about people looking at building new coal-fired power plants.
Yes, I've heard about that.
Possibly the first new coal plants in the US to be built for 20 years. And obviously then you would think, well, hang on, is this really a great idea? But, yeah, wouldn't have, and also, might sound alarming to people if you're going back to coal, but this is coal fitted with CCUS. You can actually deliver very low emissions power through that route. The theory is that you can be competitive in terms of the delivered cost of your electricity relative to a lot of other technologies like advanced nuclear or enhanced geothermal or whatever it might be. So again, there's a lot going on, a lot of innovation, a lot of interesting and exciting ideas.
Yes.
And you've got to think in terms of making real progress with these technologies, getting to the point where they can be deployed at scale. All this is actually really positive.
Yes, totally agree. And I think this is a great note to wrap up the discussion. So Ed, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for having me on your show. It's obviously a bit kind of nerve-wracking to be on the other end of, to be receiving the questions rather than asking them. But it's been great. Yeah, great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Day 2 wrapped with a sense of cautious optimism and a clear message that progress is happening even in uncertain times. We discussed how local leadership drives real progress. State-level primacy and collaboration can fast-track permitting and build community confidence. We also discussed that pairing CO2 sequestration with utilization, hydrogen, and renewable power proves decarbonization can be both sustainable and profitable. And I think the main takeaway is that clarity fuels confidence. Stable policy, clear reporting, and smart permitting reform are what keep capital flowing, especially as AI and data centers reshape global energy demand. I'm Sylvia Leyva Martinez, and this has been the Interchange Recharged podcast live from Houston at Wood Mackenzie CCUS conference. Thank you for tuning in. Muchas gracias. And keep an eye on your feed. We'll be back in just a few weeks with a special follow-up episode, diving deeper into how these conversations are translating into real-world CCUS projects. See you next time. Hasta pronto.